All right, guys, last set of problems. So right now we're going to look at problem number 5 and problem number 10. Okay, I want to look at problem 5 first. So I'm going to move that one out of the way and kind of make this one just a little bit bigger. All right, I'll move that out of the way so it's not in the way. Okay, so 5 says, what are the domain and range for the quadratic function in the graph below? Okay, if I look at 17, this slide actually goes with slide 16. So the first thing that I really want to focus on is where is the domain located on the graph? So if I look at my graph here, the domain is going to be my x-axis or my x values. So here I'm going to put x values. The domain is located with the x values. So if my domain is on the x values on the x-axis, then my range has to talk about the y values on the y-axis. So when I'm looking at the domain, I'm going to be looking at these numbers down here. When I'm looking at range, I'll be looking at these numbers over here. All right. So first thing that I want to find is what is the x value of the furthest left point on the graph? Okay. I'm actually going to use a line tool here. So if I look at this parabola, the furthest point to the left is this point right here. And I'm going to make this line going towards my my x-axis. And that number right there hits at exactly 1. Okay. And then let's see. So it hits at 1. I'm going to put a 1 right there. And the next question is, what is the x value of the furthest right point on the graph? So I'm going to kind of do the same thing here. The only thing I noticed though is like this one right here, the furthest right, as I move this line to the right-hand side, this is not actually a point. This is an arrow. And an arrow means that you're going to actually continue on and keep going. So to the right side of that point right there, this graph technically does not stop. Okay. So keep that in mind as we go through these answer choices in just a moment. So let's look at our answer choices. Let's look at A. Y is less than or equal to Y, or sorry, 1 is less than or equal to Y, which is less than or equal to 9. So we just talked about how domain has to deal with x values. So the fact that this domain has a y in it, this can't even be correct at all. So I'm just going to cross that out. This one says x has to be greater than 1. So if I look here, 1 is the first x value, and the parabola goes on to the right-hand side, and all of these numbers are greater than 1, so that's a maybe. Okay, my domain on this one starts at 1, okay, and it goes until 6, and it says that 6 is the stopping point. But we just talked about the arrow. The arrow at the end of this means that it's going to continue on, so it's technically not going to stop at 6. So I'm going to cross that one off as well. Okay. And D says that the x value has to be greater than or equal to 1. So if I look here, all right, so here's the 1, and my graph goes on to the right, and all of these numbers are greater than 1. So that could also be a possibility. Now, here's the thing. The difference in the domains is on B, you have x is greater than 1, and D, you have x is greater than or equal to 1. So here's how we decide. We look actually at this point specifically. This is an open circle. Therefore, it should not be equals to. It's just going to be open. So everything has to be greater than 1. So the only domain that actually technically worked was B for this one. Okay. Now, just to kind of double check, let's talk about the range, because the range, instead of going from left to right, the range is now going to go from bottom to top, or you can do top to bottom. Okay. So the range is, we've got to think about, see, what is the highest value the graph reaches? Well, the highest value the graph ever reaches is 9. Is my parabola ever going to go above that line? not according to this graph. So 9 is the greatest. So I have a 9 here and a 9 here. And then I also look, so I'm going to put a 9 right here. Oh, sorry. This one right here, what is the x value to the furthest point? Technically, it's not a point, so the graph continues is what we're going to put there. All right, so the lowest y value the graph reaches, let's see, well, 5 is not correct because the graph continues after 5. And technically that's not a point because that's an arrow, so it's going to just continue. So notice that the range here stopped at 5, but technically we couldn't stop at 5 because then it would be like the parabola actually stopped at that point, which it didn't. So the only correct answer could have been B in this case. All right, so that's number 5. And now let's look at problem 10. Oops. All right, so problem 10. Let's see why this one is similar. Okay, it says which graph best represents a function with a range of all real numbers greater than or equal to -6. So our vocabulary word that's super important is the word range, and we just finished talking about range over here. So the range has to deal with our y-axis, okay? And we want it to be greater than or equal to -6. So greater than or equal to -6. So we want all of our y values to be greater or equal to -6. So let's look at where our lowest point is on our graph. So in this case, the lowest point that this parabola reaches is right here. And I know it's a little hard to see, but at this point right here, is that -6? No. So the lowest point would have to be -6 somewhere down here. So it could not have been F. Okay. And let's see. The lowest point on this one, let's see, I do believe that is -6. So that could be it. All right. This one, the point is at -6. So that could be it. And this one here, the point for the y right there is at 0. So that cannot be J and it cannot be F. So it's either H or G. Now let's go back to the question itself. It says all of the y values or all of the ranges have to be greater than or equal to -6. Well, if I look at my lines that I just created right here, let me kind of make them thicker. Okay. I need all of the y values in the parabola to be greater than this line. So H has the parabola going above -6, and G has the parabola going below -6. So in order to be greater than, has to be everything above. So the correct answer would have been H in this case. And so here we're going to fill out what is the highest y value the graph reaches. Technically, it doesn't end, it continues, because if you looked, you had arrows here. So we're going to put the graph continues into positive infinity, because if something continues, we say it goes on to infinity. The lowest y value the graph reaches will be -6 in this case.